Hello, early friends! Today I have a very casual and special video for you. As I've mentioned in the past, I think there are subjects in writing that don't really have an objective answer, or a right and wrong sort of answer, and for those type of situations I actually like to make a discussion, or rather, a discussion video. For those of you unfamiliar with my discussion videos, allow me to explain to you how they work. The format is pretty simple. I come in, I explain today's subject, I give you a handful of questions, I give my answers to those questions, and then you go ahead in the comments and answer the questions yourself. We create a conversation and talk about this rather complex subject, such as the one we're talking about today. Pacing! That's right, today we're going to be talking about pacing. I received a couple of questions recently, and they dealt with the very same idea. It's the idea of how do you keep your story from moving too fast or too slow. Now, I don't know about you, but if there is one subject in writing that I think it's a gray area, I honestly feel it has to be pacing. No, I seriously mean it. When I first got all of these questions, I thought I'm gonna make a formal video and it'll be fine, and I realized as I was kind of coming up with my ideas for the video that I didn't have any solid answers. I didn't have any solid pieces of advice. All of that basically boiled down to my opinion. And as I began going down that, metaphorical rabbit hole, I began realizing that my thoughts on pacing were based on my opinion, and my opinion is very set on the way I read stories. I read stories in very minimal sittings because I don't have a lot of time throughout my day, so I tend to be more lenient towards the story as long as it keeps me engaged. And as I continued thinking about this, I realized that pacing is slightly out of the writer's hands. No, seriously, think about it. Unlike any other medium, people who pick up a book don't have to read it in one sitting. You know, like movies where you kind of have to sit down and watch the entire thing in one go, books you can pick as long as you want or as little as you want. And that kind of leaves the speed at which the reader reads up to them. And let's put that aside, let's put that thought aside, and also realize the fact that a fast pacing does not translate to a good book, and neither does a slow pacing translate to a bad book. There are examples of both things throughout the entirety of fiction. You know, like books that have really fast pacing and fail, and books that have really slow pacing and somehow manage to succeed. I think that this is really, if anything, one of the biggest gray areas in the entirety of writing. Just like me, you may be beginning to realize how complex this issue is, because as I was breaking it down, I realized, holy crap, I don't have any solid ground to stand on here. And I thought, let's make it a discussion. Let's bring this out to the table, turn the mic to all of you, and let's share our thoughts. Let's create a conversation and talk about pacing. And now, without wasting any more of your time, let's dive into today's questions. They go a little bit like this. Question number 1, give an example of good pacing. Why did it work? Number 2, give an example of bad pacing. Why did it not work? And question number 3, considering the answers above, what tips would you give to someone trying to improve the pacing of their story? Now, some of you may be thinking to yourselves, wow, these questions are a little out there. We're not directly talking about pacing, but rather things related to pacing, and that is because, as I was coming up with this video, I realized that just coming out and giving advice is not enough. I think you need to give a point of reference so that people may be able to realize how something worked, as opposed to, this movie is good because of pacing, tell them why it was good because of pacing. Again, in my experience, I've always found that giving examples of something is way more effective than just telling people what to do or what not to do. But with that out of the way, allow me to dive right in and give you my answers to these questions. Question number 1, give a good example of pacing. Why did it work? My sister is a very special person. She has a very specific tastes in movies, and she never watches things more than once. Or generally, never more than once. And I was surprised, almost shocked, when I heard that the day she picked up World War Z, she watched it 3 times on the same day, back to back, to back to back. And I thought, how is this even possible? And I hadn't considered the movie at all because I loved the World War Z book, and I knew that the movie would not do it justice, or do anything related to the book as a matter of fact. So I just dismissed the movie entirely. And months later, like after my sister went crazy over that movie, months later I kept thinking about it, and it kept creeping up in the back of my head until one day I sat down and I watched it. And this was the first movie in my life where I realized that I was on the edge of my seat. Like I would get up to grab a drink, I would sit down, and in the middle of me sitting down, something exciting would happen, and the movie would just keep going on this exciting ride through scenes of people talking and not killing zombies, mind you, until 10, 20 minutes later we'll realize, wait a minute, I didn't actually formally sit down on my chair. I've been on the edge of my seat the entire time. Lol, is this what people mean about that saying? Those of you who follow my channel know very well that I like to dissect media, and I like to be able to look at the things that I consume, and whether I like them or I don't like them, I'm able to dissect them and look at them and admit the things that worked and the things that didn't work. And one of the things that worked about World War Z, or Brad Pitt's zombie movie, was the pacing, because that movie was made of two types of scenes, okay? People talking and people killing zombies. Now, the scenes of people killing zombies tend to be always intense because there's always something at risk and something going on, and or one of our main point of view characters being at risk. That's an easy way of having the audience be engaged. Something is at risk. Simple. The problem with most zombie movies, and I'm looking at you 28 Days Later, and I'm looking at you, remake of Dawn of the Dead, is that when people are talking, things are hell of boring. Now, how did World War Z actually maintain me and keep me engaged throughout the entirety of the movie, even through the parts that were people simply talking? I want to coin a term, and I don't know if this is like a good enough term for that, but it's the idea of a lifeline. No matter what happens, you're still attached to this lifeline, and this main idea that you're attached to pulls you in, and it keeps you connected to things. And throughout the scenes of killing zombies and the scenes of talking about zombies, we were related to one thing: zombies. Zombies were always at the core of the story, whether it was discovering how the cure works, or discovering the effects of the zombies, or discovering the damage the zombies had caused. This was the lifeline. The story was connected to this. Now, I don't know if any of you have noticed, but I have a thing for zombie movies, and I've been able to dissect them and learn a lot from them. And I have noticed that a lot of zombie movies tend to make the talking moments, aka the moments where we're not fighting zombies, be very, very dull. Okay, I can feel myself about to rant, and I don't want to rant. So instead of me ranting, allow me to summarize again why I think World War Z had really good pacing. And it was because, in my opinion, everything was still related to the lifeline. You know, no matter what happened in the story, whether it was people talking about zombies, or people fighting the zombies, or people moving away from the zombies, or flying away from the zombies, whatever, things were still related to the main plot line, the main effects of that lifeline, and the things directly related to that lifeline. We were never straying away. There was never a moment in that story where I was asking myself, what was the point of this scene? And now question number 2. Give an example of bad pacing and why did it not work? Okay, it's funny because as I was coming up with these questions, at first I thought I didn't have an example, and then it hit me. I have one example, and I've been bringing up this example for years, and the movie is called Casino Royale. I like James Bond movies, and I like Casino Royale. The pacing was pretty good until the very end. I think a couple of you are probably like nodding your heads going, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Casino Royale has a really interesting arc. There comes a point in the movie, like probably 2 hours, like an hour and like 50 minutes in, and where everything is resolved. Like the main thread is like defeated, and James. Does anybody ever call him by your first name? James Bond gets the girl, and they have this chunk of scenes that, to me, I was watching it in the theaters, and it honestly felt to me like it was 30 minutes. It feels like 30 minutes of James Bond and the girl being cute, eating together, being at the beach, playing, being happy and cute, and the entire time I'm sitting there in the chair going, the movie's over. It might have been 5 minutes, but to me, sitting in that chair felt like half an hour, and I was just sitting there going, nothing is happening. You've just finished the story. Everything got wrapped up. Why am I still sitting here? And of course, all of those scenes of James Bond and the girl being cute, of course, leads to the girl dying, so that James Bond has a reason to want to go get revenge and be the more tough and aggressive James Bond as opposed to the James Bonds that we knew before. Yeah, I get it. And I understand why it was there, and I get it. But part of me, as I was coming out of that theater, was there seriously no other way to do this? Was there seriously no other way to give the watcher or the reader this information than having me sit through what felt like 30 minutes of couples being cute? Now, some people out there may be saying, oh, so you're gonna say that the movie did not work because it just came to a crawl and a stop and the movie just slowed down. I don't think so. I think there's a different value that is at fault here, and it is the idea that all of the major plot lines were resolved. Like, the big bad guy who had been defeated, everything seemed to have been finally, taken care of, and then this is the point in which, generally, James Bond kisses the girl, there's an explosion, and the movie ends. It's fine. You know, that's the way the movies usually go. But we have this huge chunk of them being cute and being a couple, and I'm sitting here like, it's over. The movie is over. Can't I go now? So again, why do I think that did not actually work? I think it didn't work because, to me, it felt like the story was over. I felt like everything had gotten resolved. You know, we had gotten to that, you know, James Bond ending of everything getting wrapped up, the baddie dies, he kisses the girl, the movie ends. But we have this chunk, and, sorry, it must have been 5 minutes, but to me it felt like half an hour of just cute moments, just to build the emotional attachment so that we could kill her and then have that be meaningful. And of course, now looking in retrospect, it does also kind of feel that, like, maybe it was just me, or maybe there were more people in the audience who felt like this, but as soon as, you know, those 30 minutes were over and she died, we immediately realized, okay, you made me go through this so that we would care, so that this would be meaningful. And it felt cheap. It felt cheap and forced. Like, it wasn't like I had been given the natural time to care about this person. It was like, we're gonna bombard you with cute couple moments so that when it's over, you will actually feel some sort of emotional resonance. It felt forced and kind of artificial. And artificial emotional attachment is not exactly something you want to sacrifice your pacing for. With all of that mild movie ranting out of the way, let's go into question 3. Considering my answers, what tips could I give to somebody wanting to improve the pacing of the story? Personally, I like coming back to the idea of the lifeline, you know? The thread, the breadcrumb trail that connects you to the main cast of characters we're looking at we're looking at the world through, and their struggle. And as long as you can keep bringing me back to that, I'm fine. Seriously, I mean that. As long as you can keep bringing me back, I will be fine. I know that somebody's gonna ask about this, and I'm gonna answer the question right now. Why didn't I use any book examples for my bad pacing and good pacings? And that is because I like to give the writer the benefit of the doubt. Really. And I read in very sporadic, like, chunks. So, you know, I cannot possibly expect people to keep me engaged on 30-page chunks. That is entirely fine. And as I mentioned, I like to give the writer the benefit of the doubt. Like, for instance, an example of a book with really, really slow pacing is Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita. It has really slow pacing, but there's the lifeline. Like, we have a clear struggle, which is, of course, like the idea of this guy traveling the country with his adopted daughter or stepdaughter, and, you know, you see, you know, they're doing, like, really mundane things like going to dinner and going from hotel to hotel and playing tennis. And it's, of course, all really mundane and slightly boring, but we have that thread, that idea of, like, for how long are they going to be able to do this? Or rather, do each other. Ha ha ha. Funny. Now, another really quick example of a book that has really slow pacing that still works because it's done on purpose is Harry Potter and the Half-Assed Movie Attempt, book 6. And I was actually reading that, and there came up to a point where I was, like, live tweeting it, and they came to a point where I realized that the book had become teenage drama. It became like Saved by the Time Turner, like literally Saved by the Time Turner. And it was like, oh, teenage drama. And I felt that the book really slowed down for me at that point. But I get it. I got it when I finished the book, because I realized, oh, all of this is just basically done as a basis, so when everything goes to hell, you can basically look at the world through Harry's point of view and, you know, look at the piles of dead bodies and be like, remember when we cared about Quidditch? Remember when we cared about, like, what girl we were gonna date? Oh man, we're in those simpler times. Again, I like to give the writer the benefit of the doubt, and I like to trust in the writer and trust in their ability to tell the story, because obviously they know it better than I do, clearly, because I didn't write it, they did. And the only times when I've been forced to stop reading a book, or I dropped it because it got boring, or I got lost because it moved too fast, was because it became incredibly stark of a difference. Like, the story was moving on at a good pace and I was following, and then suddenly a lot of things get introduced, or nothing happens, or the main plot or the main lifeline gets lost. Like, to me, it has to be such a stark difference that I cannot no longer ignore it, and I have to start questioning the writer. So again, for my advice, I don't think this is a matter of getting it perfect, because I think it takes a lot of work. It honestly takes a lot of work to screw up your pacing so badly that the reader is not gonna follow along. I honestly think, and maybe it's just because the way I read, and my own way of reading books, and that's probably entirely it, but I feel like it takes a lot of work to create a story so full of plot lines that the reader is entirely lost, or that moves so slowly and nothing happens that the reader just loses the ability to care for the characters. And that seems like it would take a lot of work, right? Mostly, instead I want to focus on creating a more engaging story, because I think that's ultimately where we're getting to with pacing, creating stories that are more engaging and can create a higher emotional resonance by having the reader care. As for my other point, I've made this point before actually in a previous video, and it's the idea that the story should probably end once you have wrapped up the main plot of the story, and any loose thread you are not planning on revisiting later. Of course, you're entirely fine with, like, finishing the book with a chapter that leads into the next book. That's fine by me. That's of course related to the overall arc of the story, and it's fine. I think that the worst example here is kind of like the Casino Royale example, where like the story finishes and then the book keeps going. The story keeps going, and events are happening that are not related to what we cared about and what we came in for, and it's just kind of like, it feels like this incredible stark difference, this enormous contrast between what we came in for and what we get at the end. I can feel myself begin to enter rant mode, so allow me to stop it right here. Once again, my advice goes a little bit like this. If you're seeking to improve the pacing of your story, I recommend focusing on the engagement and emotional attachment of your reader as opposed to speed. I think that, you know, if the reader is emotionally attached and engaged with what's going on in the story, they will follow up at the same speed you are giving it to them. Simple as that. And one of those effective ways for me has been having a lifeline, you know, having the main thread, or at least be within the vicinity of the consequences of this main thread of the story, will keep the reader engaged. Simple as that. And with my silly opinion out of the way, I want to turn the tables to you. What do you think about pacing? What are your answers to these questions? And, you know, let's make a conversation. Let's talk about things, because I do not at all expect me to be like the end all for this conversation. I never do, but particularly for this one, because I again, as I was coming up with my answers for this, I realized that all of my examples and all of my like thoughts on this were basically based on my opinion and the way that I consume stories. So clearly, I have a feeling that not everyone consumes stories like I do. So let's share our thoughts, our opinions, and let's create a conversation together. Once again, you can find all of the questions for this discussion video in the comments below. Feel free to leave your answers in the comments, be as lengthy as you want to be. I love reading your answers, and I'll be, you know, adding comments here and there and letting you know what I think. Let's start a conversation and let's all talk together about pacing. With all of that said, I hope that this video helped, and I hope that if anything, I've given you a reason to care about World War Z, because I didn't care about that movie until I watched it, and wow, the movie has really good pacing. You should go check it out. It's on Netflix. This show is brought to you by Netflix. No, it's not. They can't afford me. With all that silliness out of the way, though, I want to thank you for watching. If you would like even more writing advice, you can head over to my official writing blog over at maxkieran.tumblr.com. Like, subscribe, do all the socially related things, and I'll be seeing you soon. Mwah! Or rather, make a discussion video. For those of you unfamiliar with my discussion videos, allow me to explain to you how they work. I explain today's subject, I give you a handful of questions, I give you the answers, my answers to those questions, and then you go ahead in the comments and leave the answers to Thanks, bike man. Na 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 na, bike man.